Hello, my friends, and welcome. In this video, you will hear the amazing life story of Donald J. Trump told in easy American English. Donald John Trump was born on June 14, 1946, in Queens, New York City. Queens was one of the 5 boroughs of New York, and back then, it was a place full of working-class families, small houses, and busy streets. The Trump family, however, was not poor. They were not average either. Donald's father, Fred Trump, was already a successful builder. He made his money by building houses and apartment buildings for middle-class families in Brooklyn and Queens. Donald's mother, Mary Ann, had come from Scotland. She was a strong woman with a heavy accent and old-fashioned values. She believed in hard work, discipline, and family loyalty. She also believed in faith and tradition. The mix of Fred's tough business sense and Mary Ann's strict but caring nature shaped Donald's childhood in many ways. Donald was the 4th of 5 children. He had 3 older siblings, Mary Ann, Fred Jr., and Elizabeth, and 1 younger brother, Robert. Each child had a different personality. Mary Ann was smart and serious. She would later become a judge. Fred Jr., the older brother, was charming and kind, but he had struggles that would change the family's future. Elizabeth was creative and liked her independence. Robert, the youngest, was quiet but dependable. Donald stood out early. He was full of energy, sometimes too much energy. Teachers said he had trouble sitting still. He wanted to be noticed, to be the center of attention. Growing up, Donald saw his father working hard every day. Fred Trump was strict with his children. He wanted them to be tough, disciplined, and successful. Fred often took Donald with him to construction sites. There, young Donald saw workers laying bricks, digging foundations, and raising buildings. He also saw his father in charge, giving orders, checking details, and making deals. Donald admired that power. He liked the idea of being the boss, not the worker. But Donald's childhood was not only about business. At home, he was a lively kid. Sometimes too lively. He played pranks, talked back to teachers, and got into fights with other boys. His parents worried he was becoming too wild. At age 13, after several problems at school, they decided to send him to the New York Military Academy. The Military Academy was not a place for soft kids. It was strict. Students wore uniforms, marched in lines, and had to follow rules. For Donald, it was both a challenge and an opportunity. At first, he struggled with discipline, but soon he learned how to turn his energy into leadership. He became a student leader, organizing other boys, giving commands, and even playing sports like baseball and football. He liked competition, and he hated losing. Donald began to understand something important. Discipline and ambition could give him power. At the military academy, he was no longer just a troublemaker. He was a leader. He realized that with confidence and effort, people would follow him. That lesson stayed with him for the rest of his life. When Donald returned home during holidays, he kept watching his father's work. Fred Trump taught him lessons about money and risk. "Don't build too big," Fred would say. "Keep it safe, keep it steady. Build for the middle class, and you'll always do well." Fred believed in being careful, in avoiding flashy risks. Donald listened, but deep down, he felt different. He wanted something bigger. He didn't just want steady money. He wanted fame, success, and recognition. In high school, Donald also developed his love for appearances. He liked nice clothes, neat hair, and standing out. He believed that if you looked successful, people would treat you like you were successful. It was another lesson that would become part of his style in business and politics. When it came time for college, Donald first went to Fordham University in the Bronx. It was close to home, But after 2 years, he transferred to the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Wharton had one of the best business programs in the country. Donald studied real estate, learning the formal skills of investing, management, and finance. But more than the books, Donald learned from his experiences. He met people, watched markets, and began to dream of his own empire. During college summers, he worked for his father's company. He learned the basics: how to manage construction crews, how to handle tenants, how to negotiate with banks. Fred trusted him with small projects, and Donald proved he could handle responsibility. But still, his father's projects were small compared to what Donald imagined for himself. Donald wanted Manhattan. To him, Manhattan was the center of the world. Tall skyscrapers, luxury hotels, famous people, and big money. Queens was fine for his father, but Donald wanted the city spotlight. He wanted his name in the newspapers, on the buildings, everywhere. Even as a young man, Donald loved competition. He played sports with passion. He debated with intensity, and he carried himself with confidence. Some classmates thought he was arrogant, but Donald didn't mind. He believed arrogance, or as he called it, confidence, was necessary for leadership. If you don't believe you're the best, why should anyone else? He often thought. By the time he finished college in 1968, Donald was ready to step into the world. He was ambitious, hungry, and determined. The world outside was complicated. America was facing the Vietnam War, protests, and big changes. But Donald's eyes were not on politics or war. His eyes were on real estate, business, and success. He was about to begin his career, but already the foundation was clear. He had learned discipline at the military academy. He had gained knowledge at Wharton. He had confidence from sports and leadership roles. And most importantly, he had ambition, an ambition much larger than his father's. The boy from Queens was ready to chase Manhattan. He didn't just want to build buildings. He wanted to build a name, a brand, and eventually a legacy. The journey had only begun. In 1968, Donald Trump graduated from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He returned to New York, full of confidence and energy. His father, Fred Trump, welcomed him into the family business. The company was called Elizabeth Trump and Son, named after Fred's mother. It was successful, but mostly local. Fred focused on affordable housing in Brooklyn and Queens, areas where middle-class families lived. Donald respected his father's achievements, but he wanted more. To Donald, Queens and Brooklyn were not the center of the action. Manhattan was. Manhattan had skyscrapers, luxury hotels, Wall Street bankers, celebrities, and the media spotlight. If he could succeed there, people all over the country, and even the world, would know his name. Fred warned him. "Manhattan is risky," he said. "Too many developers lose money there. It's not like Queens. Be careful." But Donald had already made up his mind. He was ambitious, and ambition doesn't always listen to caution. The first big deal. Donald began working on small projects with his father, but soon he set his sights on Manhattan. His first real chance came in the early 1970s. A huge property called the Commodore Hotel, near Grand Central Terminal, had fallen into decline. It was once a grand place, but by then it was old, dirty, and losing money. Many people thought it was hopeless. Donald, however, saw potential. He had an idea. If he could fix the hotel, turn it into something new and shiny, he could make a name for himself. But Donald had a problem. He didn't have enough money or connections to do it alone. He needed partners. He began meeting with bankers, investors, and city officials. This was one of his first lessons in Manhattan. Success was not only about money, it was also about relationships and persuasion. Donald convinced the Hyatt hotel chain to join him. He also convinced the city to give him a tax break, arguing that saving the hotel would bring jobs and tourists. It was not easy. He had to push, negotiate, and sell his vision again and again. But finally, in 1976, the deal was approved. The Commodore Hotel was transformed into the Grand Hyatt Hotel. It opened in 1980 with glittering lights, new glass windows, and modern style. For Donald, it was more than just a business win. It was proof that he could play in the big leagues of Manhattan real estate, building a brand. From the start, Donald understood something powerful. Success in business was not only about numbers, it was also about image. He wanted his projects to have a name, a personality, and most importantly, his own mark. He started putting his name on everything. Trump was not just a family name anymore. It became a brand. He believed that if people saw his name, they would think of success, luxury, and strength. Later, this branding strategy would become his signature move, but it started in those early years. Trump Tower. After the success of the Grand Hyatt, Donald looked for his next big project. He found it on Fifth Avenue, one of the most famous streets in Manhattan. There stood the old Bonwit Teller building, a department store with a long history. But Donald didn't care about history. He cared about potential. He wanted to build something new, a skyscraper that would be both a home for the rich and a symbol of his growing empire. He fought hard to buy the property. There were legal battles, negotiations, and arguments with city officials. But Donald kept pushing. Finally, he got the rights to build. Construction began, and in 1983, Trump Tower opened its doors. The building was 58 stories of glass and steel, rising above Fifth Avenue. Inside, it had luxury apartments, offices, and even a waterfall in the lobby. The media covered the opening. Celebrities visited. And suddenly, Donald Trump was not just a young businessman. He was a star. Trump Tower became a symbol of Donald's style, bold, shiny, and glamorous. It wasn't just about money. It was about being noticed, a taste for the spotlight. Donald discovered he loved publicity. He gave interviews, appeared in magazines, and even showed up in gossip columns. He wasn't shy. In fact, he wanted people to talk about him. He believed that if people were talking about him, he was winning. This was different from his father, who preferred to stay quiet and private. Fred wanted steady money, but Donald wanted fame. He wanted to be known not just as a businessman, but as a personality. In the 1980s, Donald expanded his empire. He built casinos in Atlantic City, bought airlines, and invested in sports teams. Some projects succeeded, some failed. But whether he won or lost, one thing stayed constant. People kept talking about him. Lessons from early success. These first years in Manhattan taught Donald Trump some important lessons. Big risks can bring big rewards. The Commodore Hotel looked impossible, but Donald turned it into success. Image matters as much as reality. Trump Tower was not just a building. It was a symbol of power and luxury. Persistence wins. Deals often took years, but Donald didn't quit until he got what he wanted. People follow confidence. Even when he didn't have all the answers, Donald spoke with certainty. That confidence convinced others to join him. By the mid-1980s, Donald Trump had become one of the most famous businessmen in America. His name was everywhere. His buildings shined over Manhattan, and his personality filled newspapers and TV screens. He had achieved what he dreamed about as a boy in Queens. He was no longer just Fred Trump's son. He was Donald Trump, a name the world was starting to know. But success is never a straight line. As Donald would soon learn, with fame and risk also came failure, debt, and struggle. The next chapter of his life would test him in ways he had never faced before. The boy from Queens had reached Manhattan, but the real challenges were only beginning. By the early 1980s, Donald Trump had become a rising star in New York City. The Grand Hyatt Hotel in Trump Tower had given him fame, respect, and a taste of the spotlight. He was no longer just another real estate developer. He was a developer everyone was talking about. The city loved his bold style. Newspapers wrote about him. Magazines put his picture on their covers. Television shows invited him to speak. He wasn't just building buildings. He was building a reputation, a character, even a legend. Donald enjoyed it. He liked walking into a room and having all eyes turned to him. He liked being recognized in restaurants and at sporting events. He liked being called the Donald, a nickname the press gave him. For him, success was not just about money. It was about attention, fame, and influence, expanding the empire. With confidence running high, Donald looked for new opportunities. He didn't want to stay only in hotels or apartment buildings. He wanted to expand his empire. First, he moved into casinos in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Atlantic City was trying to compete with Las Vegas as a place for gambling and entertainment. Donald believed he could turn it into a glamorous destination. He built Trump Plaza, then Trump Castle, and finally the massive Trump Taj Mahal. The casinos were filled with lights, shows, and excitement. Donald loved the feeling of walking through his casinos, surrounded by luxury, hearing the sound of slot machines, and seeing his name shining in neon lights. He also tried his hand in sports. In 1984, he bought the New Jersey Generals, a team in the United States Football League, USFL. The league was small and tried to compete with the NFL. Donald hoped to make it bigger, maybe even rival the NFL itself. He brought in famous players and coaches. The plan didn't work in the end. The league failed, but Donald didn't regret it. He always believed in thinking big, even if the risk was high. Trump Airlines and other adventures. In the late 1980s, Donald bought a small airline called the Eastern Air Shuttle, which flew passengers between New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. He renamed it Trump Shuttle. As always, he wanted to make it luxurious, gold logos, leather seats, and elegant service. The airline never became a big success, but it showed Donald's style. He was not afraid to try something new. Real estate, casinos, sports, airlines. He wanted to touch every industry he could. He even thought about movies and television. He made cameos in films and became friends with celebrities. In New York, he wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a personality, a star in his own right, life in the spotlight. The 1980s were not only about business for Donald, they were also about lifestyle. He married Ivana Trump, a woman from Czechoslovakia who had been a model and a skier. Together, they became one of the most famous couples in America. They had 3 children, Donald Jr., Ivanka, and Eric. Ivana was elegant, stylish, and ambitious. She helped Donald with his businesses, especially in managing hotels and casinos. Together, they built a glamorous image of success. Magazines followed their every move, what they wore, where they vacationed, and what events they attended. Donald and Ivana lived in a triplets apartment at the top of Trump Tower. It was filled with gold, marble, and chandeliers. Some people thought it was too much, too flashy. But Donald didn't care. He loved luxury, and he wanted the world to see it. To him, style was a part of success, the art of the deal. In 1987, Donald published a book that would become one of the most famous business books in the world. The Art of the Deal. The book told the story of his life, his deals, and his way of thinking. But more importantly, it gave readers his philosophy. Think big. Don't aim small, because small goals don't inspire people. Protect the downside. Always know the risks before you take them. Maximize the upside. If you succeed, make sure the reward is huge. Use your leverage. In negotiations, figure out what the other side needs and use it to your advantage. Promote yourself. If you don't tell people about your success, they won't notice. The book became a bestseller. Millions of people bought it. For many, Donald Trump became a role model for ambition and confidence. He wasn't just a real estate man anymore. He was a symbol of the American dream, the idea that you could rise from anywhere and become rich and powerful if you work hard and thought big. The signs of trouble. But while the 1980s looked golden on the surface, cracks were forming. Donald's projects were expensive, and they required a lot of borrowed money. He loved building big and glamorous, but that also meant big loans and high risks. His casinos, especially the Trump Taj Mahal, cost billions of dollars. His airline was not making much profit. The economy was beginning to slow down toward the end of the decade. Some bankers worried that Donald was stretching himself too far. Donald, however, stayed confident. Sometimes by losing a battle, he liked to say, you find a new way to win the war. He believed he could always bounce back, no matter the challenge. Lessons from the 1980s. The golden decade gave Donald Trump many lessons that would follow him for life. Fame could be as powerful as fortune. Being in the news made him more influential than many businessmen who had more money but stayed in the shadows. Risk and reward are twins. The bigger the risk, the bigger the possible success, or the bigger the possible failure. Branding works. By putting Trump on everything, he created recognition and trust in his name. Confidence inspires people. Investors, workers, and even the public followed him because he looked and acted like a winner. By the end of the 1980s, Donald Trump was at the peak of his early career. He had skyscrapers, hotels, casinos, an airline, a sports team, and even a best-selling book. He had fame, wealth, and power. But the 1990s were waiting. And the 1990s would not be so kind. The same risks that had built him up were about to pull him down. The boy from Queens who conquered Manhattan would soon face his biggest test: survival. By the end of the 1980s, Donald Trump looked unstoppable. He had shiny casinos in Atlantic City, tall skyscrapers in Manhattan, an airline, a football team, and even a best-selling book. The media loved him. He was the Donald, the golden symbol of ambition and wealth. But behind the gold and glamour, trouble was brewing. Donald's empire was built on huge loans. Banks had trusted him because of his confidence and fame. They believed that if anyone could turn projects into gold, it was Donald Trump. But business is not just about dreams. It's also about timing. And in the early 1990s, timing turned against him. The economy turns. In 1990, the American economy slowed down. Real estate values dropped, interest rates rose, and people spent less money on luxury. For most businesses, it was a rough time. For Donald, who had billions in loans and giant projects that needed cash, it was a disaster. His casinos in Atlantic City were especially heavy burdens. The Trump Taj Mahal, which opened in 1990, was called the eighth wonder of the world. It was filled with chandeliers, marble, and gold, but it cost almost $1 billion to build. Soon, it couldn't make enough money to pay the interest on its debt. One by one, his businesses started bleeding cash. His airline wasn't profitable. His hotels were under pressure. Even his personal lifestyle, yachts, planes, and mansions, added to financial strain. By 1991, Donald Trump was in serious trouble. Newspapers that once celebrated him now wrote about his possible collapse. Some called him the king of debt. Others predicted the Trump empire would fall. Personal life in turmoil. As if the financial crisis was enough, Donald's personal life also went through a storm. His marriage to Ivana Trump was falling apart. Their divorce became one of the most public and talked about breakups in America. Tabloids covered every detail, splashing their fights across front pages. Donald, who once loved the spotlight, now found himself burned by it. The same attention that made him famous now exposed his pain and problems to the world. Still, he refused to hide. He gave interviews, answered questions, and stayed in the media. Some people thought he was finished. But Donald wasn't ready to quit. Negotiating survival. The early 1990s tested Donald Trump's greatest skill, negotiation. He had billions of dollars in debt, and more than 70 banks were involved in his loans. Most businessmen in that situation would have filed for bankruptcy and disappeared. But Donald had something others didn't: the Trump brand. Banks realized that if Donald completely failed, they would lose everything. His name still had value. His projects, even if in trouble, were still worth something if he stayed in charge. So, instead of pushing him out, the banks made a deal with him. They restructured his debts, gave him more time, and even allowed him to keep control of his properties. Donald had convinced them that it was better to bet on him than to throw him away. It was one of the toughest battles of his life. He had to give up some assets, his yacht, his airline, and parts of his casinos. He had to live with less freedom and more pressure. But he survived. And for Donald Trump, survival was victory. Learning from the fall. The 1990s humbled Donald. For the first time, he had to face the reality that not everything he touched would turn to gold. But he also discovered something about himself. He was a fighter. Many people in his position would have walked away. They would have accepted defeat. But Donald's personality didn't allow that. He liked to say, what separates the winners from the losers is how a person reacts to each new twist of fate. The 1990s taught him that even when the world seems against you, persistence can keep you alive. Rebuilding the image. As the decade went on, Donald slowly rebuilt his empire. He focused again on real estate, especially in Manhattan. He developed new buildings, licensed his name to projects around the world, and rebuilt his brand as a symbol of luxury and success. His personal life also changed. After divorcing Ivana, he married Marla Maples in 1993. They had a daughter, Tiffany. The marriage didn't last. They divorced in 1999. But Donald remained close to all his children. Through the ups and downs, Donald always kept one thing constant. He never disappeared. He gave interviews, appeared in commercials, and stayed visible. He understood that in America, visibility was power. If people saw you, they believed in you. The comeback spirit. By the late 1990s, Donald's finances were more stable. He wasn't as flashy as in the 1980s, but he was still in the game. More importantly, he had survived a fall that could have destroyed him. That survival gave him a new kind of confidence. He knew he wasn't invincible, but he also knew he was unbreakable. And that mix, humility from failure and strength from survival, made him ready for the next stage of his journey. Lessons from the 1990s. The crash of the 1990s gave Donald Trump lessons that would define his future. Failure is not the end. Losing money, reputation, or even personal happiness doesn't mean you're finished. It means you have to fight harder. Negotiate, don't surrender. Even in debt, Donald found a way to convince banks to support him instead of abandon him. Survival is victory. You don't always need to win big. Sometimes just staying alive gives you the chance to win later. Visibility matters. By staying in the public eye, he kept his brand alive, even during his weakest moments. By the end of the 1990s, Donald Trump was no longer just the golden boy of the 1980s. He was something more powerful, a survivor. The boy from Queens had conquered Manhattan, lost it, and clawed his way back. The 2000s were coming, and with them, new opportunities. Donald was ready, not just to build buildings, but to build something even bigger, a new identity as a global celebrity. When the 1990s ended, Donald Trump was no longer the golden star of the 1980s. He had been tested, shaken, and nearly destroyed by debt. But he had also survived. That survival gave him a second chance. Now, in the early 2000s, he was ready to reinvent himself, not only as a businessman, but as a global celebrity. A new century, a new start. The 2000s opened with energy and possibility. Technology was changing the world. Television was more powerful than ever, and the internet was starting to grow. Donald saw opportunities not only in buildings, but also in media and entertainment. He still had real estate deals. Trump World Tower, near the United Nations, was one of his proudest achievements of the time. He also licensed his name to luxury projects around the world, condos, hotels, and golf courses. But Donald realized something important. His name itself was more valuable than any single building. If people believed Trump meant success and luxury, then his name could travel farther than any skyscraper. Enter The Apprentice. In 2004, Donald made the boldest move of his new career. He became the star of a reality television show called The Apprentice. The idea was simple but brilliant. A group of ambitious young people competed in business challenges. Each week, they had to prove their skills in marketing, sales, or management. Donald Trump sat at the head of the boardroom table, listening, judging, and finally making the famous decision, "You're fired." The show was a hit. Millions of Americans tuned in every week to watch Donald as a powerful boss. They saw him as tough, confident, and commanding. For many viewers, this was their first real introduction to him. The businessman became a television icon. The Apprentice didn't just entertain people. It rebuilt Donald's image. Suddenly, he wasn't a man who almost went bankrupt in the 1990s. He was a wise, decisive leader who demanded excellence. His catchphrase, "You're fired," became part of American culture, building the Trump brand. Television gave Donald something no business deal could: direct connection to millions of people. He used that connection to expand his brand. The Trump name began to appear everywhere. Trump International hotels in cities around the world. Trump golf courses from Florida to Scotland. Trump-branded suits, ties, and even bottled water. Trump University, a program that promised to teach people his business secrets. Some of these ventures were successful, others controversial, but all of them carried the same idea. The Trump name equals success. Whether people loved him or hated him, they couldn't ignore him. Personal life in the spotlight. During this time, Donald's personal life also changed. In 2005, he married Melania Naus, a model from Slovenia. Their wedding was glamorous, attended by celebrities, and even covered in fashion magazines. In 2006, they had a son, Barron. With Melania by his side, Donald presented an image of stability and elegance. Together, they became part of the new century celebrity world, appearing at galas, charity events, and on magazine covers. The power of media. Donald understood that the 2000s were about more than money. They were about attention. He knew how to create headlines, how to make people talk, and how to use television to his advantage. He often called reporters directly, gave bold quotes, and made sure his opinion was always heard. Some people thought he was arrogant. Others thought he was smart. But no one could deny that he knew how to stay in the spotlight. He also began to speak more about politics. In interviews, he criticized leaders, talked about trade, and questioned America's direction. Many people saw it as just another part of his showman style. Few imagined that he would one day run for president, facing controversy. Not everything in the 2000s was smooth. Trump University faced lawsuits from students who said they didn't get the education they were promised. Some of his projects failed to make money. Critics said he was more about image than substance. But Donald always pushed back. He defended himself in interviews, argued with critics, and kept moving forward. He believed that in business and life, the key was not avoiding criticism. It was surviving it. The Apprentice effect. The Apprentice didn't just boost Donald's fame. It changed how millions of Americans saw success. For many viewers, Donald Trump represented the dream of being rich, powerful, and respected. Young people wanted to be like him. Business schools studied him. Even comedians joked about him, which only made him more famous. Donald enjoyed it. He liked being in people's living rooms every week. He liked the authority the show gave him. Most of all, he liked the way the show made him a national figure, not just a New York businessman. Lessons from the 2000s. The new millennium gave Donald Trump lessons very different from those of the 1990s. Reinvention is possible. Even after failure, you can rebuild your image if you adapt to new opportunities. Media is power. A television show gave him more influence than many billion-dollar deals. Your name is your brand. If people believe in your name, it can open doors everywhere. Visibility creates credibility. By staying on TV and in the news, Donald made himself look bigger and more important than ever. By the end of the 2000s, Donald Trump was not just a businessman. He was a celebrity, a television star, and a brand recognized around the world. He had turned survival into revival, and revival into global fame. The boy from Queens had now become a household name across America. And while many thought his story would end with television, Donald had other plans, bigger plans. The 2010s were coming, and with them, the greatest twist of his life. By the end of the 2000s, Donald Trump was one of the most famous businessmen in the world. Thanks to The Apprentice, millions of Americans saw him as a symbol of power, confidence, and success. His name was on buildings, hotels, golf courses, and products. He had wealth, fame, and influence. For most people, that would be enough, but not for Donald Trump. Deep inside, he wanted something bigger, something no building or TV show could give him: political power, talking politics. Donald had always loved talking about politics. As far back as the 1980s, he gave interviews criticizing trade deals, government spending, and America's foreign policy. In the 1990s, he even considered running for president with a smaller political party, but he didn't take the step. By the 2010s, however, the country was changing. Many Americans were frustrated. Jobs had disappeared overseas. Factories had closed. Immigration was a hot issue. Washington politicians seemed out of touch. People wanted someone who spoke directly, without the polished language of career politicians. Donald saw an opportunity, the birth of a campaign. In 2015, Donald Trump announced his candidacy for President of the United States. He did it in classic Trump style, by riding down an escalator inside Trump Tower with Melania by his side. Cameras flashed, reporters filled the lobby, and Donald made a bold speech. He talked about illegal immigration, unfair trade deals, and the need to make America strong again. He promised to make America great again, a slogan that became the heart of his campaign. Many experts laughed. They said he wasn't serious, that he was only running to get attention. The media called his candidacy a publicity stunt. But Donald had heard those doubts before, in real estate, in casinos, in television. Every time he had proved people wrong. Connecting with the people. What shocked the political world was how quickly Donald connected with millions of ordinary Americans. He held rallies in stadiums and arenas where tens of thousands came to hear him speak. He used simple, direct language. He told stories. He made jokes. He said what many people felt but were afraid to say out loud. On television, he was already famous. On social media, especially Twitter, he became even more powerful. He used it to speak directly to people without filters. While other candidates used careful speeches, Donald tweeted in plain, sometimes rough, language. It made headlines every day. To his supporters, he was refreshing, someone who didn't sound like a politician. To his critics, he was dangerous and unpredictable. Either way, everyone was talking about him, beating the odds. In the Republican Party, Donald faced 16 other candidates, many of them experienced politicians. At first, few thought he had a chance. But one by one, he defeated them. He gave them nicknames, challenged them in debates, and dominated the media coverage. By mid-2016, he had done the impossible. He became the Republican nominee for president. Now he faced Hillary Clinton, one of the most famous and powerful Democrats in the country. The media predicted Hillary would win easily. She had decades of political experience, while Donald had none. But Donald had something else: energy, boldness, and the ability to connect with frustrated voters. The 2016 election, the campaign was one of the most dramatic in American history. Every day brought new controversies, arguments, and headlines. Critics attacked Donald for his style, his words, and his past. Supporters praised him for his honesty, his strength, and his refusal to back down. Donald traveled across the country, holding rally after rally. His slogan, "Make America Great Again," appeared on millions of red hats. People waited for hours just to hear him speak. He promised to bring back jobs, secure the borders, cut taxes, and put America first. On election night in November 2016, the world watched in shock. Against all predictions, Donald Trump won. He carried states that had voted Democratic for decades. He defeated Hillary Clinton in one of the biggest upsets in political history. Donald Trump, the boy from Queens, the businessman, the TV star, was now the 45th president of the United States. The moment of victory. For Donald, the victory was the ultimate deal. He had spent his whole life chasing bigger and bigger goals. First Manhattan, then global fame, and now the White House. When he stood on stage in the early hours of November 9th, 2016, he told the cheering crowd, "It is time for us to come together as one united people." Some Americans celebrated with joy. Others were shocked and angry. But no one could deny the scale of his achievement. Donald Trump had done what almost everyone said was impossible. Lessons from the rise to power. The story of Donald Trump's political rise offered powerful lessons, both for his supporters and his critics. Never underestimate outsiders. Experience is valuable, but fresh energy can change the game. Communication is key. Speaking directly and simply often connects better than polished speeches. Confidence can overcome doubt. Even when experts laugh, Donald believed, and his belief inspired millions. Big risks bring big rewards. Running for president was the biggest risk of his life, and it gave him the biggest prize. By the end of 2016, Donald Trump had reached the highest office in the land. The boy from Queens, once a restless troublemaker, had climbed all the way to the White House. But becoming president was not the end of his journey. It was the beginning of the toughest challenge yet. Leading a divided country through storms that no deal-maker had ever faced before. On January 20th, 2017, Donald J. Trump placed his hand on the Bible and took the oath of office as the 45th President of the United States. Standing on the steps of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., with millions watching on TV around the world, the boy from Queens had reached the peak of power. His speech that day was bold and direct. He spoke about returning power to the people, protecting American workers, and putting America first. It was a message that matched his campaign and showed how he planned to govern. The outsider was now inside. But the White House was not a boardroom or a TV set. It was the most powerful and most difficult office in the world. A different kind of president. From the very beginning, Donald Trump did things differently. He used Twitter every day to speak directly to the public. No other president had ever used social media like him. Some people loved it. Finally, they could hear the president unfiltered. Others thought it was reckless and unpresidential. He brought a business style into government. He wanted quick results, tough negotiations, and bold decisions. He often clashed with Washington insiders, but he didn't mind. To him, that was proof he was changing the system. Economic growth. One of Donald's main promises was to boost the economy. During his presidency, he pushed for lower taxes, fewer regulations, and new trade deals. In 2017, he signed a major tax reform bill which cut corporate taxes and aimed to bring jobs back to America. For a time, the economy grew strongly. Unemployment dropped to its lowest level in decades. The stock market reached record highs. Supporters said he was delivering on his promise to make America great again, at least in economic terms. Foreign policy. Donald also changed America's role in the world. He wanted trade deals that were fairer for the U.S. He pushed Canada and Mexico to renegotiate NAFTA, creating a new deal called USMCA. He placed tariffs on China, arguing that the U.S. had been losing for too long in trade. He also met face-to-face with world leaders in ways few presidents had. Most famously, he met with North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un. It was historic. The first time a sitting U.S. president had met a North Korean leader. Supporters praised him for trying something new. Critics said it was risky and gave legitimacy to a dictator. But Donald believed in direct action. To him, deals and relationships mattered more than traditions or diplomatic rules. Controversy and division. Donald Trump's presidency was not smooth. His bold style often created controversy. The media followed his every word, often with criticism. Protests filled the streets. His policies on immigration, especially building a wall at the southern border, drew fierce debate. Some Americans loved his plain talk and his willingness to fight. Others saw him as divisive and dangerous. The country became more polarized. Supporters and critics rarely agreed on anything about him. Donald didn't back down. He thrived on conflict. In his mind, criticism meant he was making an impact. If you're not being attacked, he once said, you're probably not doing anything important. Impeachment. In 2019, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to impeach Donald Trump over a phone call with Ukraine's president. It was a historic moment. Only a few presidents had ever been impeached. Donald fought back hard, calling it a witch hunt. The Senate later acquitted him, meaning he stayed in office. To his supporters, it was proof that he was strong and the system was against him. To his critics, it was proof of chaos in his presidency. The pandemic. The biggest test of Donald Trump's presidency came in 2020 with the arrival of COVID-19. The pandemic shut down businesses, schools, and travel. Millions lost jobs. Hospitals filled with patients. Donald faced one of the hardest challenges any leader could face. His decisions, press conferences, and tweets were under intense scrutiny. He pushed for vaccines to be developed quickly, launching Operation Warp Speed. Within months, vaccines were ready, faster than many experts thought possible. Still, the pandemic divided the country even more. Some praised his push to reopen the economy and support businesses. Others criticized his handling of public health messaging. For Donald, it was the toughest battle of his presidency, the 2020 election. In November 2020, Donald Trump faced re-election against Democrat Joe Biden. It was one of the most intense and emotional elections in American history. Because of the pandemic, many Americans voted by mail, leading to long counts and disputes. When results showed Biden as the winner, Donald claimed the election was unfair. He challenged the results in courts and on social media. His supporters believe him. His critics accuse him of damaging democracy. The conflict reached a peak on January 6, 2021, when protests in Washington turned violent at the U.S. Capitol. It was a dark day in American history. Many blamed Donald for inspiring the unrest, while others argued he called only for peaceful protest. 2 weeks later, Joe Biden was sworn in as president. Donald Trump left the White House but did not disappear. He still had millions of loyal supporters and a powerful presence in American politics. Lessons from the presidency. Donald Trump's 4 years in the White House were some of the most dramatic in modern history. They offered lessons about leadership, power, and persistence. Disruption brings change. By refusing to act like a traditional politician, Donald changed the way politics worked. Communication defines leadership. His use of social media showed the power and risks of speaking directly to the people. Every leader faces storms. From impeachment to the pandemic, Donald's term proved that challenges are constant in power. Belief is strength. Through victories and defeats, Donald never lost confidence in himself. By 2021, Donald Trump had lived many lives. Businessman, celebrity, and president. He had known glory and failure, cheers and boos, power and loss. But if his past showed anything, it was this. Donald Trump never saw an ending as final. For him, every loss was just another chance for a comeback. And even after leaving the White House, his story was far from over. When Donald Trump left Washington, D.C. in January 2021, many people thought his story was over. Most former presidents quietly retire, write books, give speeches, and enjoy private life. But Donald Trump was not most presidents. He flew back to Florida, to his Mar-a-Lago resort, and almost immediately began speaking to his supporters again. The White House chapter had closed. But for Donald, the fight was far from finished. A movement, not just a man. During his presidency, Donald had built something bigger than himself, a political movement. Millions of Americans wore his red hats with "Make America Great Again." They filled stadiums to hear him speak. They followed his every word online. Even without the presidency, that movement stayed alive. Donald gave speeches, held rallies, and promised his supporters that the best was yet to come. He said, "We will never give up. We will never concede. Our movement has only just begun." To his critics, It sounded like stubbornness. To his supporters, it sounded like hope, facing new battles. After leaving office, Donald faced challenges unlike anything before. Social media companies banned him from their platforms. Investigations followed him. Critics said his influence would fade. But Donald had faced storms before: bankruptcies, scandals, failures. Every time, people said he was finished. Every time he came back. Now, instead of hiding, he rebuilt. He launched new ways to communicate directly with the public. He created Truth Social, his own social media platform. He supported political candidates who shared his vision. Slowly, he remained at the center of American politics. The comeback talk. Very quickly, talk of a comeback began. Would Donald Trump run for president again? Many thought it was impossible. He was too controversial, too polarizing. But others believed that if anyone could make such a return, it was him. In 2022, he strongly hinted that he was ready. In 2023, he officially announced he was running again in 2024. The boy from Queens, who had already shocked the world once, was ready to try again. Legacy and influence. Whatever happens in elections, Donald Trump's influence on America is undeniable. He changed the way campaigns are run, how presidents communicate, and how people see politics. He showed that an outsider, even without political experience, could rise to the very top. His legacy is debated. Supporters see him as a fighter who gave a voice to forgotten Americans. Critics see him as a divider who brought chaos. But both sides agree he left a mark that will not fade. Lesson for life. Looking at Donald Trump's life, from a restless boy in Queens to businessman, TV star, president, and comeback fighter, there are lessons anyone can learn, whether they admire him or not. Believe in yourself. Donald never doubted his own strength, even when others laughed. Turned setbacks into fuel. Bankruptcies, scandals, defeats. He used each one as motivation to rise again. Speak directly. His simple, bold style of communication connected with millions. Keep moving forward. Win or lose, Donald always looked to the next challenge. Life will always bring critics, failures, and hard times. What matters most is not how many times you fall, but how many times you get back up. Donald Trump's story is living proof of that, a motivational ending. As of now, Donald Trump's future is still being written. Maybe he will return to the White House. Maybe he will simply remain one of the most famous and influential figures of modern times. But one thing is certain: he has lived a life of action, not hesitation. He took risks, chased dreams, and refused to accept limits. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson his story offers. Dream big, fight hard, and never stop moving forward. Final words. Donald Trump's journey is not just about politics, money, or fame. It's about persistence. From Queens to Manhattan, from bankruptcy to billions, from reality TV to the Oval Office, from defeat to possible comeback, his life shows what happens when someone refuses to quit. Love him or hate him, you can't ignore him. And maybe that is the secret of Donald Trump's success. The world always has to pay attention. For anyone learning English, chasing goals, or fighting their own battles, his story carries a reminder. The future belongs to those who keep going no matter what.